Hello everyone. In this tutorial we are going to dig into data grid control in WPF. Okay, that being said, we are going to create a new project and that's going to be WPF.NET Framework. Okay, I'm going to click Next, and here we are going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this WPF underscore data grid and hit create. Okay, Visual Studio 2019 is prepping our project. Let's get a minute, and here we are. All right, first thing first, I like to flip my panes and increase the XAML area to start with. Okay, so as we've seen in most controls, it's just a matter of in XAML to create the data grid. It's just a matter of adding the tags, open close tags, and you're good to go. Your data grid is added. Right now it's taking the whole window. That's because we didn't specify anything else. Right, let's just put this aside for a second. We are going to go to our main window.xaml.cs file, and we're going to bring in some data to work with. I'm going to get rid of some of this stuff here, and let's clean up this unused using statements, unnecessary using statements, and keep it clean for now. Okay, so data-wise, we are going to be using a CSV file that contains a bunch of songs. Basically, it's this file here. Actually go into the folder. So we have a bunch of songs in the CSV file, and we are going to use this as our data source. Before I copy the path, we're going to create a class that's going to map against this data. So in this file, we have an ID, we have a song name or title, we have the artist, we have the genre, artist, and whether it's a soundtrack or not. Okay, so let's go ahead and create couple of classes. So first class is going to be, let me actually increase the font size here a little bit so we can see comfortably. So public, let's go with 130. Public class, let's call this song. Let's add a couple of properties. So prop, first one is going to be ID, it's going to be integer. The second one is going to be string type. Let's call this title. The next one is going to be, let's see, artist. Oops, my bad, string. Artist. So we'll stop at this point. We'll add the rest later. There is a reason for that, so we'll see that later on. Okay, so we add 3 properties, and this is going to map to some of our data in our CSV file. So let's create another class that's going to supply us the data. So public class, let's call it songs, plural. and we're going to create a static method in here. So public static it's going to return a list of, whoopsie, I think, yeah. So we cleaned up all the using statements. That's why we gained that error. So we have to add back in system collections generic namespace. Okay, that's added. So it's going to be a list of song, and let's call this get songs. Okay. And some of this stuff you'll remember from our CSV demo tutorial that we did a while ago. So if you're not familiar working with CSV files, please go check that out. Regardless, let's continue. All right, so we create our method. So let's read our CSV file. Start reading it actually. Let me copy the folder, the path. Copy and we'll paste in here. Var file equals double quotes and paste. Okay. And let's get rid of the errors by adding an add symbol up front, and then we'll add the file name to the end of the string. So the file name is songs.csv. Okay. All right. Next, we're going to create a new variable that's going to read the lines. So var lines, we're going to call on to the file class. We don't have system.io, I believe. Hit control dot and add system.io to the namespaces. Now our file class will work. And we'll say read all lines and pass in our file. Okay, that's going to read all the lines in that file, songs CSV file, and we'll return an array of strings. Okay. Next, we're going to create a for loop, and that's going to continue up to lines.length. Okay, so it's going to read all the lines, and within our for loop, we're going to map the data to our song class. So actually first we have to grab the line. So var line equals lines I. So we're going to grab the current line and then create an instance of our song class. So var song equals new song, and oops, and open close curly braces. Inside here we'll say ID equals line, the first value, and title equals line, the second value, zero-based index. Okay, and we got an error here. Let's see, cannot increment chart to string. Okay, all right. We have to split our. Forgot to split the string. So we'll split all the string, the line that comes in by the comma character, and then will get the values. So now we have an error here. That's because the ID is an integer and this one is a string, so we have to parse this. So int.parse. Okay, so title is in the second spot. So the artist in the third, fourth spot. So it's going to be artist equals to line index of 3, I believe. Okay. All right, so we mapped our string array to our song object. Okay, next I'm going to create a new list here, so let's use var list equals new list of songs. Okay, so open close our brackets, and then right at the end of this object creation, we'll add the object to the list. So list dot add the song. Okay. All right. Once we went through the loop and added all the songs to the list, we'll simply say return list. Okay. All right. So we got our data. Now we could go up here and say, let's actually give it a name to our data grid first so we can reference it. Let's call this DG for short. All right, so DG dot item source equals songs dot get songs. Okay, and at this point, if we run this, let's actually build first and then run it. Okay, build succeeds. Let's run it. All right, beautiful. So we got our grid working as expected. You may wonder why we have our data listed in this order, with ID as the first, title as the second, and artist as the third column. But it turns out Datagrid is smart enough to look at our collection, our data, and our song class and see the order the properties listed. If you change the order of these properties, let's do this real quick. And if I put the ID as the third property and run this again, the ID will show in our third column. Okay? So Datagrid, it's really a powerful tool. I'm in control. Okay, let's put it back and run this again. Make sure we didn't break anything. Okay. We're back to our original layout. So for quick demos, data binding to a data grid this way is okay, but that's not what we are going to do in this demo. We are going to go into more details. So I'm going to comment this out and going to create a property right here. It's going to return a list of song objects. Okay, list of songs. Let's call this song list. Okay, I'm going to set this to this method right here. So get songs. Okay. So instead of directly setting the item source here, I'm declaring a property and setting it to this method that returns a list of songs. Okay, now I'm going to go to my XAML, my design. By the way, I increased the zoom level of our data grid. Okay, so let's create a window data context. And in our data context, we'll declare local, and we have our songs class right here. So that's what we are looking for. So that's our data context, and I'm gonna come down here inside our data grid, and I'm gonna set the item source to binding song list. We should have that, and we do. Yep. Okay, now we have design time data that we can visualize a lot better than not seeing the data and kind of hoping you are doing it right. Well, actually, it wasn't that complex, so I mean, there's nothing complex at this point when we did this setting the item source. That was quite simple, but you know what I'm talking about. So, okay, once we have that live data, design time data, let's talk about some of the properties. And the first one I'm going to talk about is horizontal grid lines brush. So this defines the color of our horizontal. As soon as we declared it, our horizontal grid lines are gone. All is left is the vertical grid lines. So here we can set the color. For instance, red. Okay, we can do the same thing with vertical grid lines. The reason I do this because it's not that obvious. It says horizontal grid lines brush, versus same color. So it may be, some people may have a hard time finding it. So I'm just, touching on it so everybody knows where to find it. Okay, so that's the horizontal grid lines brush. The other property I want to touch on is visibility. Grid lines, let's see. Grid lines visibility, that's where you set whether you want the grid lines to be visible or not. So our option all means all visible. And the other options are horizontal only. That's, you can only have horizontal grid lines. The other option is vertical and none. So we can have none, no grid lines, or we can have just vertical. So the choice is yours. Okay, just want to get that out of the way. The next property is, let's actually bring the grid lines back in. Header visibility. So header visibility, the options are all, column, none, row. So we have only header column headers. I think the default is all, but if I say column only, it's fine. See the little space that was to the left of the grid, it's gone. If I say row, a little space, we don't have any row headers, but a little space shows up, giving us, reminding us we have a row header. or we can say none. Then we don't have any headers, columns gone too. Or if I say rows only, I think, yeah, that's rows only removes the column header as well. So that's header visibility. Let's change this back to all. Okay, so the next couple of properties, I'm going to run this and show you that way. So by default, when we click on the column header, it will automatically sort ascending or descending. So if the current state is ascending, it will descend. If it's descending, it will ascend. So by clicking, you'll see that arrow here. It kind of gives you a hint which way you are sorting the information, the data. Same thing with other columns. You can sort by title, ascending or descending, or by artist, or any other property that we have. Okay, so that's sorting with Datagrid. But if you don't want the user to be able to do that, there's a property that's called can user reorder sort columns, and if you change this to false, in that case the user won't be able to sort any of the columns. Okay, all right, so that's can user sort the columns. Let's run this again. Actually, let's talk about the next one. So by default you can rearrange the columns, can change, but this doesn't make any change in the underlying data. Just visually you can reorder this columns, but again, if you don't want the user to be able to do that, there's a property called can user reorder columns, and if we set this to false, by default is true, then the user of your application won't be able to do that. So now I can't move the columns around. Okay, so that's that. Let's see, what else do we have? Can user add rows? Okay, let me run this first. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but let's say I want to add a row here, say number 30, and type in, I don't know, try to remember, say, try to think of a song. Oh, let's say yesterday. Beatles. Now, if I hit enter, I added a row, and then I got a blank row here that I can add another one. I mean, right now it's not doing anything. Again, it's not changing our underlying data, but at the UI level, we can do that. So if we don't want the user to be able to do that, we'll set this to false from default of true. Now the user won't be able to do it. And if you can see, it's gone. That empty row that was here 2 minutes ago, it's gone. So that means we are not allowed to add any rows to the grid. Similarly, there's another property close to this, but let's actually, but at this point, we can't add row, but we can still edit. If you double click on a cell, you can still edit here. Okay. So if you change the if read-only property to true, then we can't even do that. So if your data grid is just for read-only purposes, that's the property you're looking for. Now we can select the row, but if you double click, it won't allow you to edit or change anything. Okay, so we got those out of the way. We covered quite a few properties. Let's see. There are still a lot to cover. Datagrid is really a huge topic by itself. I'll be right back. Okay, so let's continue. So the next property I want to talk about is can user resize columns. By default, it's true. Let's actually set this to true first. That's the default. If I run this again, now at this point we can resize our columns the way we want it. But if you don't want the user to be able to do that, we'll just set it to false, in which case we are not allowed to change the column widths. We can do the same thing with row widths. So now I can't even select the column and change the see, now I still can do the rows, but it doesn't give me the indicator that I can do anything on the column widths. Right, so we can we can do the same thing with the rows as well if you want to, and that's the property called can user resize rows. Same thing here, we can set this to false, and then we can change the height of the rows. Okay. Now we can't do anything with the height or width of the columns or the rows. Okay. Selection unit. That's the next property we're going to cover. So selection unit. Okay, the options are cell or row header, full row. So default is full row, I believe, which means we can select, once we select a record, it selects the whole row. But if you change this to a cell, then we can only select one cell at a time, I think. Instead of row, you're selecting a cell. Let's try the other one. Cell or row header. So let's run this. So cell is working as it's supposed to, but when you click on the row header, you can select the whole row. Okay, so that's select cell or row header. Okay, let's change this back to full row. So in which case, doesn't matter what part of the row we click, we're selecting the whole row. Okay, so that's that. um, selection mode. Let's see how that works. So we got single or extended. Single is the default, or we can select a single row or a single cell depending on our selection unit. Extended means we can select more than one. So now I can select, I think I have to hold the shift. If I hold the shift, then I can select more than or control. Okay, so with shift, if I use the mouse, click here and then hold the shift down, click anywhere else, it will select all the rows in between as well. If you want to do like different rows, select different rows that's not adjacent or next to each other, then you hold the control key down and then select the rows you like to select. Okay, so that's selection mode. Let's change this back to single. I think my Visual Studio is going to crash. Nope, it didn't. Okay, that was a little scary. Did I turn on some hotkeys or something? Right, let me go back this way because it's not letting me. Extend it. So if I change this to single, geez, hello. I must have turned on some hotkeys by accident. Alright, so I'm going to get rid of this for now. Okay, so the next property I'd like to talk about is, let's see if we covered Resize, sort, pretty much covered all these. Alright, the next one I want to cover, actually let me zoom this out a little bit, is width. Normally I don't cover width, but in case of grid, Datagrid, it makes a huge difference, so I'm going to cover that. So width, I can set to a certain value. Okay, that actually decreased my grid to, I'm setting the width of the grid. That's not what I wanted to. Alright, so I'm talking about column widths. Alright, so column width. So I can set to a certain value, which didn't work really the way I wanted. Let's run this, see what happens. Actually, it worked. So I was able to set each column. I guess I should have rebuilt it for it to take effect. So I set the width of each column to an equal 200 value, 200 pixels value. Okay. I could also do default, I think it's auto. So if auto, let me actually rebuild this. For some reason, it's not taking effect immediately. So auto, it will adjust based on the longest column, I mean the widest column. So in our case, like this one is, I think this one is the widest or longest string. So the whole column will resize to this column. Right? We can again do a fixed value, or we could do a star. If I do a star, type in star there, let's rebuild this. It will split the grid, the whole grid, into equal columns and get rid of the space at the end of the last column. So let's take this, let's roll this back to auto and rebuild this. Now you'll see there's a long empty space here. So the fourth column here is long and it's taking the rest of the space. But again, with the star, when we say star, we are saying split into equal columns and get rid of the extra space and utilize all available space. Okay, so that's what star does when you set at the grid level. When we get into custom grid, custom layout, we'll probably cover this one more time, but that's what star does. Let me actually go in properties and see if there's another option. Let's see, should be under columns, layout, auto. Not sure if it's going to give us a drop down here. No, probably not. Well, anyway, I think we covered the most important ones. So we have fixed value, we have auto, and we have the star. Okay. Oh, actually, there are two more. Size 2 header. Okay. So what this self-explanatory. It basically resizes the column width based on the column header. So if I build this again, it's going to ignore the data, the size of the data inside the columns. It's going to arrange the width based on the column header width. Okay. And similarly, there is another one, size 2 cells. This one actually does I think similar to auto. So this one resizes, that's the default, I think. It resizes to the size of the largest cell. Okay. I think we pretty much covered the important ones. If you want me to cover more, please drop in the comment section. But as far as properties, I think that should do it for now. But this is not the end of this tutorial. There is still a lot more to cover about Datagrid. So we're going to continue. All right, for now, take it easy.